I get my hands on some small walnut logs. The tree was cut down in someone's backyard, and a friend of mine who knows the owner asked if I could get some pieces of that tree. Otherwise it would have been firewood, so I saved it from that. And of course I wanted to make some bolts out of it. And no, this was not all walnut what you could see there. Most of it was from an apple tree, but I will cover that in another video. So I brought all the pieces into my shop. I got 4 bigger and 4 smaller logs, and now I have to prepare them for the lathe. I recently got a new bandsaw blade to try out, which is designed for cutting wet wood. It is a 1/2 inch 3 TPI blade with a very aggressive set. I get it from Tough Saws, and I put a link to it in the description of this video. So next I put it onto my bandsaw. It is the homemade Matthias model bandsaw, which I built with his plans about 1 year ago. And here adjusting the upper and lower blade guides. Putting the cover back on and fire it up. Next I need to cut the logs in half. Ideally you want to cut through the center of the tree, and it should have equal distances from the edges. But because this tree grew in a strange way, I would end up with a really big and a really small piece, so I decided to just cut down the middle. But before I start cutting, I clean up the log a little bit from dirt with a wire brush. Then putting it onto the saw and adjust the blade guide. This now are 24 centimeters of thickness. Let's see how well it cuts. And the video is not sped up. My bandsaw is equipped with a 2 horsepower motor, and it cuts through it with no problem. And it also left a pretty nice surface. The smaller logs were even more fun to cut. Again, this is the real-time video. And here the same thing in 4 times speed. I could cut the small logs and the smallest of the big ones, but the other big ones were too big for this bandsaw. So I first have to cut them a little bit shorter, and because I don't have a chainsaw, I have to use a jig. I actually built this jig shortly after I had the bandsaw done. It is a bore that rides in the miter slot with slots where I can attach different things. For this application there are 2 threaded rods with the log in between and a bar that holds the log in place. And 2 clamps on the edge prevent it from sliding side to side. With the log securely fixed in place, I can now cut off a slice to make the log short enough. The maximum depth of cut of this saw is about 26.8 centimeters, and I try to cut the logs pretty close to that value. As you can see, there was no blade drift at all. So then I did this to the other logs as well. And you can start to see the beautiful walnut colors. I also kept the offcut slices. Maybe I make a project out of them once they are dry. So now this log is the absolutely biggest piece I ever had on the saw. And it's also the tallest that the saw can cut. I even had to remove the upper cover. You may think I pushed the saw to its limits here, but I cut through it without resistance. I can just say, thanks Matthias Model, your bandsaw design works well. Now with all the logs cut in half, I'm next gonna cut them into a circle. So I marked the center and drill a little hole there. Then I measured the distance from the center to all 4 edges and set my adjustable circle jig to the smallest measurement. That way I get the biggest possible circle out of this piece. The piece is then just put on the pivoting point and I can slide it into the blade. The jig stops at the right position and then I simply turn the piece until it's a full circle. The leftover just slides off and there's the first perfect bowl blank. The blade didn't wander at all when I cut the circles. I can really recommend this blade if you have to cut green wood or bowl blanks. With a hole in the center, it would be very convenient to mount the bowl with a screw chuck. And my chuck also has a screw to attach, but unfortunately it's not strong enough for bolts of that size. And I already broke one. So I try to center the faceplate as good as I can. When I turn green wood, I am very aggressive and take off huge amounts of material, so the bowl has to be mounted quite sturdy. Then I mounted it on the lathe, and thanks to cutting it to a circle, it was balanced pretty well, so I could start at the second speed, which is about 670 RPM. It was a lot of fun turning green wood of that size again. I really like turning green wood, and especially the outside. You can make such a lot of progress in no time and make a mess all over the shop. Here you can see and hear what happens to my lathe when I want to take too much material at a time. The belt slips or the motor stops. The pass I took there was about 1.5 centimeters wide, a bit too much for my little lathe. Once the outside is done, I shape the tenon to remount it with the chuck. Then mounting the chuck. I like to at first tighten it just a little bit, align it with the tailstock and then tighten it fully. That way the bolts should run pretty true when I remount them on the lathe. It is not 100% insurance, but helps. It mostly depends on how well the tenon is shaped. Now cleaning up the face and starting to hollow it out. For some reason I didn't shoot a lot of scenes from that process and I only got 3 good scenes. Probably because there were too many chips behind the lathe and I couldn't get the tripod there anymore. So sorry for that. But here is a little time lapse of a natural edge one. It is basically the same as it is with normal bolts, but I mount them between centers and not with the faceplate. You can also see the chips piling up around the lathe. Now I got all the bolts rough turned and they are ready to dry for up to a year. I dated them all. These are quite a few, and I also made some natural edge ones. But now I need somebody who cleans up my shop. This turning session made such an incredibly huge mess. The stuff you can see right here is only half of it. Here behind the lathe is the rest of it. So I'm a little bit busy in cleaning up for the next hours. In fact, it took me about 1.5 hours to get the shop clean again. I could fill up 6 bags with chips. I get these bags from a friend of mine who is a baker, and he collected his empty bags of flour for me. You maybe also wonder what happened to my table saw. It's actually a pretty long story, and I talk about that someday in another video. And no, cleaning up is not loud, but my earmuffs have speakers in them and I like to listen to an audiobook when I'm busy in the shop. And here are all the bolts drying. I'll come back to some of them in a year or so.